My frequent guest, Allan Shaw's analogies are just one of the characteristics that make him relatable. And when talking about a startup biotech's appeal to potential investors, for instance, he likes to say they're more attractive if they can, quote, bring their own beer to the party. Well, today we're going to talk about what happens when the beer maybe starts to run out, so to speak, when the initial capital investments kind of start to wane. What's catalyzing the development and continuance of emerging bio beyond those initial capital investments? What M&A, partnership, and collaboration trends are shaping emerging bio's business development strategy, and what the leaders of emerging bio companies should be doing to keep the ball moving downfield? Allan, it's good to have you back. Good to see you.
Great to see you, Matt. And hope the year's been off to a great start. And certainly impressed with the podcast's evolution in terms of some of the video technology and 21st century features that you guys are embracing.
Yeah, well, we're having fun with it, putting a little bit more effort and capital, so to speak, behind it, a little more investment, and looking to continue to grow it in 2022. So thanks for noticing, appreciate that. So kicking off this conversation around M&A, you've told me in recent conversations that you've picked up on through conversations with your contacts some high hopes for M&A activity in 2022. Anticipation that perhaps it'll pick up and catalyze the markets in this coming year. What signs are you seeing to support that might happen?
Right now, I would say in terms of the chatter around M&A and the expectations around M&A, I think there's a lot of fundamental reasons for why people are perceiving that the environment right now is pretty ripe for it. Mm-hmm. I would also say it falls into the category that many people are also hoping for that to catalyze, particularly given what's going on with the capital markets and the tape. It finished the year really, really bad, and it started the new year even worse, where the access to capital has changed. And there seems to be just a general feeling that this is going to be around for a little bit. You're always going to have people taking happy pills and telling you that, it's good. And there's reasons to believe that maybe the first half of the year, but generally speaking, the markets aren't available. And by definition, that's going to increase the cost of capital. And you see valuations erode like they did last year in the XBI at this point in time. As we're talking, is down almost over 10% for the beginning of this year. And there doesn't seem to be a flaw. So when that occurs, when valuations go down, cost of capital goes up. So you need to be a lot more judicious about how you deploy capital, where you spend capital. And so, we've seen this before that, if that avenue isn't open, usually going down an M&A or strategic path will be the most efficient way for companies to continue to execute and move forward and also raise capital through those efforts, both by the reduction of outflows of costs, as well as the inflow associated with some of the nature and the attributes of those collaborations. So I think that's a dynamic that evolves from that situation. I think the other thing that speaks to it is the fact that a lot of the large pharma companies are also sitting on boatloads of cash. There's a lot of COVID windfalls. You've seen that with Pfizer. They did a deal. They've been doing a couple of deals, and just recently, at the end of this year, they did a deal. Then Dicerna was acquired by Novo, and just in the span of the last 2 weeks of December, there was $10 billion worth of deals. And when you couple that with the fact that companies are trading below cash, and that implies negative enterprise value, it's a recipe that for people to change the way they're doing business. And the dynamic on that was that if that starts to happen, particularly on the M&A, the collaborations will be a little bit less of a capital markets catalyst, but it'll cause people to come in right now and step in and start investing. I think no one wants to catch a falling knife. And while there are specialist funds and people who understand the space and recognize the dislocation and that they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, a lot of the generalist investors, or a term that I'm embracing that I've heard used by others recently, the tourists, they have moved on. So I think we've sown the seeds for a little bit of a perfect storm for there to be a little bit of a shift in terms of that.
On the flip side of that, we talk about the hopes for M&A in 2022, excuse me. And you've mentioned a couple of times in your response, you hinted at, partnerships and collaboration. You sent some Ernst & Young analysis my way not too long ago that suggested M&A activity is being displaced a bit by strategic collaborations and alliances and licensing deals. It's sort of a trend Ernst & Young has been covering for the past few years. So let's talk about those alternatives. Tell me your thoughts on those alternatives and their pros and cons from the perspective of the seller: alliances, licensing deals, collaborations, as opposed to M&A.
I view these things as all things that you should kind of consider in your corporate development toolbox. My general feeling, it's like buying a suit off a rack. One size doesn't fit all. Mm-hmm. And you should really be careful of the considerations and the alternative business development strategies available to achieve those desired goals. For instance, in some circumstances, buying a company outright is not always effective or capital efficient. This is particularly true when you're talking about acquisitions. They're predicated by a lead asset, whereby the acquirer is paying for that asset, and they may not necessarily subscribe value to the other assets or the other target's portfolio. And I'll come back to that point later that I think illustrates that. But to give you an analogy on the topic, when you want to have a steak, do you buy the cow or you just get the steak? It's not cost effective to buy the whole cow. Unless you're a butcher, then you can integrate all that. But for most people, it doesn't make sense. And I would put M&A in that same concept. And you see that often where companies will sell themselves, but then they'll spin off certain assets back to the seller, and they'll create companies off of that. That's a time-tested result. So there's no secrets there. Yeah. So if you're trying to maximize value, for your company, an M&A direction isn't necessarily the best way of going about it. You can take the deli's counter approach and slice it like salami.
Yeah. What about this though, Allan? If I'm the owner of the cow, maybe I'd prefer to sell you the entire cow rather than chop off a steak. Right? So give it to me from that perspective. I guess, what are the pros and cons of licensing and partnership dealing if I'm the innovator who's got maybe 3 or 4 candidates in my pipeline, and I'm entertaining interest from you to take one of those assets or to pay me for one of those assets?
It depends, what filter you're looking through. But I would say, generally speaking, collaborations in contrast offer many advantages. Particularly when you're talking about pre-commercial assets. They provide flexibility and enable creativity for organizations open to a hybrid approach of innovation, innovative alliances, partnerships, and acquisitions to help drive a cost-effective value creation. Because they're different dials and different ways to go about it. For example, collaborations combine the strength of a larger company, such as their global commercial operations and footprint, their manufacturing capabilities, their supply chains, their regulatory acumen, with the agility and the entrepreneurial thinking of smaller companies.
Yeah.
It's like chocolate and peanut butter. Such alliances play an important role in enabling capital time efficient deployment that complement and enhance core capabilities while allowing for developmental synergies. So I think there's a lot there. Of course, development stage companies also collaborations with developmental stage companies and Big Brother, often do become precursors to a merger. It's akin to dating before marriage or test driving a car. A lot of times you may just want a certain thing, but the dynamics of a collaboration, you understand each other's cultures, you understand how people do business, you learn how to respect and see how you complement each other. So it's interesting, right? It's planting a seed, and sometimes these things evolve. If pursued in a targeted manner, the strategy can provide a very significant pipeline leverage and diversification by cost effectively increasing the number of shots on goals while diffusing risk, structuring deals that correlate payments to success-based milestones. You got total alignment there. You're not getting in front of your skis. You're earning it. And those generally create, when people are rowing in the same direction, that generally is a good formula for success. Obviously, there's a devil in a lot of those details. I would urge people to be very thoughtful about the governance around this, how decisions get made. Once your product's sitting on the shelf, there should be performance covenants, but there's a lot of things to be mindful of, but at a high level, strategically, I think it's generally a win-win situation for both sides. And I would say that, again, these things are not mutually exclusive. There's no guarantees of success.
What do you think about, we talk, it's obvious, it's kind of tried and true that M&A is a catalyst of capital markets, right? I mean, it keeps money moving. It's traditionally recognized as good, right? It's good for market activity. Do partnership, collaboration, licensing deals like those we're talking about now pack an equivalent capital market punch? Are they as good for the markets as M&A?
It depends on how you evaluate and measure them. M&A provides instant gratification. It's like a sugar high, and it's an exit. But in long-term, collaborations may enable greater value creation. To better illustrate, I offer a closer look at some of the strategic objectives associated with successful transactions. And I think, to answer your question, it really depends on what are you achieving? What kind of synergy is coming out of those collaborations, and where do you think it can go? It's as opposed to what I would say toothless or meatless types of deals. I think it should be something that draws upon the scientific expertise. I think your goal is to bring in the best science in the world and determine the most cost-effective solution to looking at it from a buyer's perspective. You want to capitalize on development capabilities to reduce cost and lead time. That's really on both sides of the equation, right? Time is always the enemy. You want to accelerate development. You want to accelerate discovery. You want to deploy efficient life cycle management. You want to have a regulatory strategy that makes sense. And again, by working together, I think you can achieve a lot of that. And particularly when you get into the therapeutic areas and leveraging therapeutic footprints, very few companies I've seen are marketing in the IO space commercially, right? If you're starting a phase 3 study, by yourself, it begs a lot of questions. Why isn't anyone working with you? I think in terms of the considerations as well, or attributes, is really being very therapeutically focused. And I think you can see that many times. And you really want to be able to focus on their footprint, accelerate the collaborator's footprint and yours to maximize asset value and provide further substance and breadth and accelerate the commercial that portfolio. I think our other attributes are really focusing on areas of high unmet medical needs, and that are typically prone to innovation. And I would also call out, I think to really just to give an example, I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, and to drive your point about partnerships, collaborations, M&A, capital markets punch. I think there's really a great example. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Loxo Oncology, but when they were trading around $3 billion market cap, reasonably good market cap for where they were relative to development. And there was a lot of expectation in the market in terms of the lead program, which is a TRK inhibitor. And ultimately, they found a collaboration rather than an acquisition at the time. And they wound up collaborating that lead program with Bayer. Basically, effectively out-licensed a lot of it, got a great deal. But it was disappointing because it took the M&A buzz out of the stock. The stock traded off a little bit. People weren't sure. But it also spoke on the other side of the coin. And it goes back to the cow and the steak, that the company at the time, their CEO, Josh, he saw a lot more value in the platform, in the portfolio, and that was not being subscribed to.
Yeah.
And they thought that this, and actually saw more potential. So they were able to, do a pretty good sweet deal, but it wasn't an M&A, so it didn't have the punch or the pizzazz. But it 2 years later, you fast forward, they were ultimately taken out by Lilly for over $8 billion about, more than 2x on the assets that no one subscribed value to.
Right.
So, you can collaborate, you can license, and you can do M&A. And it's really all about maximizing your value and value creation. Not everybody subscribes value to all elements. It's like art, people see different things. So I think that to me, is a good way of looking at it and distinguishing it. But if you're hitting your cylinders on things that are fundamentally sound, and I think people look at it is it capital efficient, or are they ultimately making a better asset, maximizing the value, right? It should be synergistic at the end of the day. When we collaborate and we partner, we talk to the collaborators or the inventors that we want to work with, and we take the approach is, we don't want to buy your kids, we want to help raise them together. Collectively we can have the potential of this child is off the charts.
Yeah.
That's the way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, it's a cool way to look at it. Although, the reference to art might be a little disconcerting to some of us who like to, put things in boxes and keep things very formal. And I want to get my mind around that a little bit, because I spend so much time talking with, startup biotech advisors who talk about beginning with the end in mind and building your business with intentionality and knowing where you want to take it and what you want to do with it. And it occurs to me that in some cases, perhaps being too prescriptive on what you want to, like, hey, we're at our, it's founding day. Let's start a company. We've got something to build, we've got an asset to build a pipeline around. Let's start a company around it. Now, from day one, we need to determine what's the end game here. Are we going to take this thing through to commercialization? Are we going to look to be sold? Are we going to look to merge with someone? Are we, going to try to get big enough to acquire someone ourselves? Like, to some degree, it sounds like that rote intentionality might be foolhardy or too prescriptive. So maybe a better way to kind of explore that and help me get my mind around, the reality is to share some characteristics of a company that's perhaps built to be bought, whether intentionally or by happenstance. Some characteristics of a company that's built to be bought versus characteristics of a company that's, built for partnership or licensing opportunities. I don't know. Am I approaching that from the right perspective to kind of, like I said, get my mind around what those candidates for buyout or merger or partnership or licensing look like?
No, it's a fair way of trying to evaluate the landscape, because I think, companies are effectively put together differently. We'll put another way, as you put it, what are the characteristics that distinguish companies that are bought versus companies that are sold?
Yeah,
and
sort of a retrospective approach, right, to the question.
Kind of, I think a little bit, because I think those inform, the deals that work, the deals that get premium, and the deals that are more like rescue stories at the end of the day. When you're tying two rocks together, do you think it's going to float? I generally don't. But staying on point. First of all, are you building a company or are you building a facade? And it's important to understand and evaluate. When I look at companies, I'm certainly looking at the jockeys, the people involved. I think it gives you a lot of understanding in terms of the integrity of what's being done, the thoroughness that's being done. It informs how well capitalized the company is. Are they doing things rightly? Are they taking shortcuts? So I think you want to understand that, and their approach to team building. There's A teams and there's B teams and there's middling teams, and I think that tells you a lot at the end of the day, because the middling teams really straight-faced, they don't have the capability of taking it to the finish line, and I think you always have to think about willing to take it to the finish line. I don't think you can, I was in a conversation not that long ago where we were looking at some capital planning, and we were looking at, we should, as part of our long range plan, we should be looking at the phase 3 studies. And the comment that came back was, but nobody our size is going to do a phase 3 study in this program by ourselves. We'll have to partner with somebody. Mm-hmm. But and from a practical matter, there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with that. But in terms of running your business, in terms of positioning yourself for success, you need to be prepared to take it to the finish line. You need to be aware of those costs. You need to be aware of what's involved. And then by doing that, it also allows you to better understand what you're getting in exchange for a partnership, for a collaboration. What is the economic savings? What are the execution value adds associated with it? So that really reflects a blind spot to people, and strikes me as that you're not prepared to take it to a finish line. Right. And if you can't take it to the finish line, you've already conceded a major factor in your negotiations. The biggest way to negotiate is being able to walk away if you don't get what you works. An alternative example of that is a company that's been crushing it is Biohaven, right? They're developing a product, they're marketing a product for migraines. That's a general care, primary care type of product. You don't see companies launching those things by themselves. Mm-hmm. People look to try to take advantage of that. I didn't give them the deals that that were worth, that felt the company was worth. And now the company is, multi-billion-dollar company, and they've demonstrated that, there's ways to maximize the value when they were willing to build the company for success. So I think a lot of it is the approach to you building your team, being mindful of the competitive landscape, and really, being in touch with your masculine side and your feminine side. Understand where the warts are and where your advantages are, and so I think those are some of the ways to think about or and evaluating whether or not somebody's really in it for real or somebody's looking to just sell you a used car at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about data to data generation. And I think people who think they can just kind of keep the lights on and keep the plate spinning, but without necessarily doing something that's relevant is important. Those are some of the things that I look at and consider when folks are real or not.
Yeah.
And I think timelines, you can also just look at it. What are they advocating? Is this real? Is this realistic? Do they really know what it takes? Because the ones who don't know what it takes are going to be the ones that really aren't, they're not for real. And those are the ones you kind of hold your nose and walk away.
Yeah. From the innovator's perspective, the prospective stake from the perspective of the prospective stake sale. Should those companies, in your opinion, make that intent part of their development strategy? In other words, should they, does it make sense from the outset to say, all right, let's build a group of assets that we can divest into licensing and partnership agreements, or let's build a group of assets that, cohesively should, in theory, look like a good acquisition target? Or is there an in-between, or no, or maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is no. The best acquisitions are that example that you gave of Loxo and Bayer that maybe weren't planned, but worked out well in the end. What are your thoughts on that? Because I want to convey that to, if there is value in that strategy from the outset, I want to have a discussion around that for the benefit of the leaders of new and emerging biopharmas.
No, it's the right question to ask. I don't think there's an easy one answer there. It's hard to generalize. I think you want to be fundamentally focused, right? And there's a lot of boxes to check when you look at fundamental. It's the science. And are you doing something that's innovative and impactful, or is it me too? Is it on the margins? I think those things are all fundamentally relevant in the calculus here. Simply put, if you develop an impactful drug that is clinically, commercially, economically relevant, a company will be spoiled for choice to maximize value creation. A lot of paths, a lot of options, a lot of ways to be opportunistic. That's what Loxo did. And if you develop a Me Too product, the for sale sign could be hanging around your neck for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be forced to take it to the finish line and demonstrate the monetization, right? All of these transactions are substitutes for monetization. You're just accelerating the monetization of your assets and avoiding a lot of the execution risk associated with doing that. Yeah. I think you got to be pragmatic. You got to understand, your strengths and what you're good at. And, few companies can do what Biohaven did. It's a reflection on the team and the leadership to be able to have that confidence and know-how to be able to integrate like that. That's a lot easier said than done.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the advantages of licensing and collaborative agreements. And I want to get your take on this because, it occurs to me that the benefits are more clear to buying companies than selling companies. Maybe and maybe not benefits, but I guess the perspective on who to pick and why, the strategy behind those picks seems obvious to me from the buy side. For instance, we have a hole to fill in our pipeline, and that candidate at Allan Shaw Therapeutics looks interesting to me, right? So from that perspective, I can see, my broad portfolio, I can see holes that perhaps I could fill. I could see market opportunities that perhaps I can fill by acquiring an asset as opposed to an entire company. That I mean, maybe it's my simple mind, but that seems obvious. I'm curious about some of the advantages of licensing and collaborative agreements from the sell side, from the seller side, right, from the innovator side.
It's interesting that that the buyer's advantages are obvious, but it's less clear from the other side of the table.
It's not, and Alan, it's not that I'm contrarian. I'm just simple-minded.
I'll be happy to serve as your publicist on that point, not to reinforce it, but to move people away from that perception, if there is one. But for a transaction to be successful, it needs to be a win-win for all stakeholders, and I think that's fundamental. It should be solving a problem or a resolution, or really help accelerate the program. There should be very clear and obvious reasons. For an emerging bio company perspective, it enables them to focus on their core strengths while reducing the execution risk, such as the development, manufacturing, regulatory, commercial. A partner could bring essays. They can bring a lot of other perspective to the table on the development, help you, they've been down this rodeo a lot of times. They can help inform paths to avoid mistakes, better ways to engage the FDA. So there's so many little intangibles there that, it's important to not miss those. Importantly, it also helps compress timelines. You've heard me so many times about time being the enemy, and it's competitive, and you want to be able to get drugs to market. There's a lot of overhead costs associated when you get delays. People forget about that, but that incrementally adds to your development costs. And it saves capital and human resources. You don't have to hire people. It just allows you to focus and spend money on other better value creating activities. And in this crazy market, it also provides a manufactured catalyst as well, because you're providing validation from a third party of interest that should have a positive impact on the asset development, which is in this overcrowded market, as we've discussed, helps you further differentiate, particularly when you're competing for investor mindshare.
Yeah. In a situation where perhaps it wasn't the initial intent to create a company or an asset, custom designed for acquisition or licensing partnership deal, there could certainly be some emotional attachment to a candidate or an asset that's found itself a darling of potential buyers. There's certainly the emotional attachment, the potential risk. I'm curious about what advice you might give those folks, the small companies who develop something that's appealing to larger companies to acquire. To ensure, what advice would you give them to sort of ensure that, one, that they're squeezing the most value out of the arrangement and not being taken to the cleaners, and two, that they're avoiding risk, big risk, the big risks that might be, some of it might be more emotional than factual, but of giving up that potential control.
It's there's a lot of different factors in terms of what's important, what you're trying to achieve. And we could probably spend a lot of time drinking beer going into the details of that. But I think in terms of the foundation, the guiding principles in terms of best practices that enable successful outcomes, albeit buy side or sell side on the transaction, whether you're being hunted or in the hunt. I think there's several ingredients that facilitate favorable outcomes. And I think you really, really need to have a very clear, crystal focus on your needs and your goals. And really look at that relative to what your organization is and isn't. Mm-hmm. And understand those gaps, because I think by doing that, it becomes very clear what you're solving for. And then by doing that, I think you further have a better understanding, or deep understanding of how to leverage your core expertise, and it's really then really just figuring out, how do you leverage that? How do you take what you do good and do it better and faster and quicker and more capital efficiently? And then once you understand that, there's somebody who brings those needs, and then just figuring out, being open-minded, open white piece of paper, whiteboard, being flexible in terms of the different ways to bring it there. Yeah. You can buy it, you can rent it, you can source it, you can particularly carve out and collaborate on one asset without giving away your technology. You can be doing things that are non-core. If everybody should really be focused. And if there's therapeutic elements that are outside of that, you can use a collaborator to help validate that on their nickel, on their cost, their time. And now you've got a third-party validation. And now you've got value being subscribed to a part of your technology that previously didn't even have any light being shined on it. Yeah. And they're potentially even unlocking that value and in a passive way from your perspective. So I think there's a lot of winning ways to go, but those would be, the tenets in terms of that.
Good stuff. We're running short on time, so we're going to start winding things down here, but I'm curious about your, as we kind of wrap things up, what's your gut telling you? We started the conversation out talking about how, perhaps looking at the numbers, M&A might be trending down, but collaboration and licensing and partnership is trending up, albeit in the context of knowing that there's still hope and desire for good old fashioned M&A out there. So what's your gut telling you for 2022 about M&A and strategic collab, and to what effect on the markets in the industry?
My gut and my magic 8 ball, both.
Neither one of you worked for the Jets this past season, did they?
That was, some of that was predetermined. I mean, I wasn't surprised by the outcome at all. But we're pointing in the right direction, I think, notwithstanding our legacy. I think, to your question, given the capital market tantrum that's translating into higher capital costs for most companies, I believe the combination of M&A and collaborations will continue to provide the most cost-effective framework, particularly given the business cycle that we're entering. And, I think it should have been a way that people always conducted business. I just think that when the capital spigot was running as much as it was, and the cost of capital was so much lower, people had luxuries that now maybe they should not be pursuing anymore. So given that, I think that M&A and the collaborations really do provide the most cost-effective framework, particularly given the business cycle that we're entering.
Yeah, awesome. Well, take it home for us, Allan. Give us on the topic. Take it home for us with your best Shawism nuggets of advice.
In some cases, I may sound a little bit like a broken record, but I think, in terms of kind of wrapping this up until next time, I think I would only encourage people to always remember that there's no need, particularly in this time, there's no need to recreate the wheel. The time is always the enemy, and the shortest distance between 2 points is a shortcut. Be creative, be resourceful, and think out of the box. Drug development is hard enough. No need to be a hero. Simply focus on what you're good at, and just as important, know what you're not good at.
Yeah, well, good stuff. And we do hear these common the refrain, right? We hear it repeatedly, but it's those are messages that bear repeating, Allan. We appreciate your willingness to come on and share your thoughts and expertise with us.
Always a pleasure. This has always been fun, and really been enjoying to participate in the evolution of the platform, and to be continued.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk to you next time, and onward and forward. In the meantime, that's Allan Shaw. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, whose unrelenting commitment to emerging bio startups is on full display at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging bio. I encourage you to explore that site. Give us a visit at bioprocessonline.com. And while you're there, subscribe to my newsletter. And if you like what you're hearing here, please subscribe to the pod. Give us 5 stars. And as always, thanks for listening.